I had always dreamed of a night like this. The kind of evening where everything falls perfectly into place. The dress, the hair, the makeup, the atmosphere. And most importantly, him, my husband, Greg, he was by my side and we were living our dream life. It wasn't just about the money, the glamour, or the fancy parties. We had a connection, a love that seemed unbreakable. Or at least, that's what I thought. The gala was being held at the grandest hotel in Greenwich. You could feel the luxury in the air, crystal chandeliers sparkling above, the finest wines being poured, and a crowd that oozed wealth and power. I slipped into my custom-made black dress, the one that hugged my curves just right, and I felt like the world was at my feet. My heels clicked on the marble floors as we walked into the ballroom, arm in arm. Everyone's eyes turned to us, and I couldn't help but feel like the queen of the night. Greg looked incredible. His tailored tuxedo fit him perfectly, his dark hair slicked back, a charming smile that could make any room feel like home. We were a perfect pair, and everyone knew it. The whispers, the looks, the admiration, we were the couple everyone envied. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel proud. Proud of us. But then it happened. As we made our way through the crowd, I noticed her. Miranda. She was standing in the corner of the room, laughing with a group of men who all seemed to be hanging on her every word. She had that look, the kind of beauty that turned heads without trying. Her dress was a shade of deep emerald, her platinum blonde hair cascading perfectly down her back. But it wasn't just her looks that drew people in, it was her presence. She had the power to command a room without saying a word. She was the kind of woman who had everything, the kind of woman you couldn't help but feel small next to. And then I saw her look at Greg. It was a small glance at first, just a fleeting moment, but it was enough. Her eyes locked with his, and I could see the shift. There was something in the way they looked at each other, something that made me feel, well, unseen. I shook it off. After all, Greg and I had been together for years. We had a history, a love. This woman, no matter how stunning or confident, was just another face in the crowd. Nothing could break what we had. But as the night went on, something in my gut told me I was wrong. We mingled, we laughed, we danced. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about Miranda. Every time I glanced around the room, I saw her there, always just a little too close to Greg. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but then I caught them. It happened near the bar, just as I was about to join them. I saw Greg and Miranda standing together, their faces inches apart. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language said it all. The way he was smiling at her, the way she was laughing, it felt wrong. It felt like they were sharing something private, something more. My heart sank. I didn't know why, but I felt sick. There was this creeping feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't ignore. And then, as if on cue, Greg looked up and saw me standing there. His smile faltered for a second, just enough for me to notice. He quickly turned away and muttered something to Miranda before walking toward me, like nothing had happened. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice casual, almost too casual. He kissed me on the cheek, but it felt distant, like the kiss was just a formality, not a gesture of love. I forced a smile. "Hi, Greg." The conversation continued as if nothing had happened. He told me about the people he had just spoken to, the deals that were in the works, the usual, but I wasn't listening. I couldn't. All I could think about was that look he shared with Miranda. It wasn't until later that evening, after the speeches and the toasts, that it all came crashing down. I went to the restroom to touch up my makeup. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my lipstick, I overheard voices in the hallway. Two men were talking, their voices low, but their words were clear. "Did you see the way Greg was with Miranda tonight? I thought he was with Leela." "Yeah, well, looks like she's not his type anymore. He's been eyeing her all night. I heard they're leaving together." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The floor beneath me seemed to tilt, and I had to steady myself against the counter. Miranda, Greg, leaving together. I felt like the walls were closing in around me. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this true? Was he really planning to leave me for her? For her? I thought back to every little moment that had felt off. The way Greg had been distracted lately, the late nights, the coldness between us. But I had convinced myself that it was just stress, that it was nothing, that it was all in my head. But this was real. I didn't even think. I just walked out of the restroom trying to keep my composure. My legs felt weak, my hands trembling, but I couldn't let anyone see me break. I had to confront him, I had to know the truth. And so, I made my way to the bar, where Greg was standing with Miranda, laughing like old friends. It felt like time slowed down as I approached them. They looked up when I arrived, and for a moment they both seemed startled, caught off guard. But then Greg's face softened, and he smiled. "Leela," he said, his voice a little too smooth, a little too rehearsed. "What's up?" I couldn't even look at him. I couldn't meet his eyes. I turned to Miranda, who was standing there with a smug smile on her face. Her eyes glinted with something I couldn't name, but it wasn't friendly. "Leela," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "It's so nice to finally meet you." I swallowed hard, but I couldn't form words. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in the betrayal, in the lie that had been building up around me. Greg's hand brushed against Miranda's arm, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I looked him straight in the eye. The man I had married, the man I had loved. And in that moment, I realized that he was the one who had changed. "I know," he said, as if reading my thoughts. His voice was soft but firm. "I know this is hard for you, but Miranda and we've been talking. And well, I think it's time for us to move forward, together." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. His words echoed in my mind, each one like a nail in a coffin. Move forward? What did that even mean? It wasn't just a casual conversation. This was it, the end of everything we had built. I tried to speak, to ask him how long this had been going on, how she had crept into our lives so effortlessly. But nothing came out. I couldn't speak through the knot in my throat, the tears threatening to spill over. Greg took a step toward me, but I took a step back, my heart racing. This wasn't the man I knew. This wasn't the man who promised me forever. "You don't have to say anything," he continued. I think it's for the best. We've both changed." And with that, he walked away, his arm around Miranda, leaving me standing there, completely alone. The room spun. My knees buckled, but I somehow managed to stay upright. The world around me faded to nothing as I stared at the back of my husband, walking away, disappearing into the crowd with another woman. In that moment, I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what my life was. But one thing was certain, this was not the end. Not for me, not by a long shot. The rest of the night was a blur. I don't remember how I made it through the gala after Greg left with her, but somehow, I managed to put on a mask and keep it together for the rest of the night. I stayed at the event, pretending I was fine, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, and nodding along to conversations that I wasn't even part of. But inside, I felt like a stranger in my own body, lost and disconnected. It wasn't until I got home that the reality hit me. The house felt empty, too quiet. The echo of my footsteps was the only sound as I moved through the halls. It was supposed to be our home, the place we built together, the place I imagined growing old in. Now, it felt like a cold, hollow shell. I walked into our bedroom, the room that had once been filled with warmth and comfort. Now, the bed felt like a distant memory. I ran my hand along the side of it, tracing the spot where Greg used to lie, the spot that felt so empty now. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. I wanted to do anything to make it stop hurting. But all I could do was sit there on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside me. How did I not see it coming? How had I been so blind? The silence in the house was deafening, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that smile he had given me just moments before he turned his back on me. "We've both changed," he said. What did that even mean? Did I change too? Or did I just fail to notice the slow unraveling of everything I thought we had? I shook my head and grabbed my phone, unlocking it with shaking hands. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to call him, beg him to come back, to tell me it was all a mistake, but I knew deep down that there was no point. He was gone, and he wasn't coming back. Instead, I opened the messages. The first was from my best friend, Sarah. Her text was simple: "How are you holding up? Call me if you need to talk." I didn't call. I didn't want to talk about it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face anyone, especially not Sarah. I needed to be alone. The next message was from Greg. I hadn't even realized he'd texted me until now. It was a short message, just a few words. "I'll be back later to grab my things." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the screen. I didn't respond. What could I say? Goodbye? Take care? There was nothing left to say. I deleted the message and tossed my phone aside. I could feel the tears starting to burn in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet, not until I was alone. The next few days were a blur of empty mornings and lonely nights. I went through the motions, forcing myself to get up, put on clothes, and go out like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, and I wasn't fine. I went to work, sat at my desk, and pretended that nothing had changed. I smiled at the people around me, made small talk, and pretended to be engaged in the endless meetings that filled my schedule. But the whole time, I felt like I was floating in a fog, disconnected from the world. When I got home, the house felt even emptier. Greg's things were gone, his clothes, his shoes, his books. It was like he had never been there at all. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't that I was happy he was gone, it wasn't that at all. It was just quiet, peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to pretend everything was okay. I didn't have to hide the hurt, the disappointment, the fear of being left behind. But I couldn't keep pretending forever. One afternoon, about a week after the gala, I found myself sitting on the couch, my mind swirling with the same questions that had plagued me since that night. How could he do this? How could he just throw everything away for her? And why did it hurt so much? I knew Greg was in love with Miranda. I could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he smiled when she spoke. He hadn't even tried to hide it. But what about me? What about everything we had? Was it all just a lie? I could feel the anger building up inside of me, a fierce, burning anger that I had tried so hard to suppress. I had spent so much time feeling sorry for myself, wallowing in my own misery, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stay here, broken and defeated. I couldn't let him have that power over me. I had to do something. I had to take control. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to stop letting Greg's betrayal define me. And that's when I made a decision. I was going to make him regret it. I was going to prove to him, to Miranda, and to myself that I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for. The first step was simple. I wasn't going to sit around and cry anymore. I wasn't going to beg him to come back. If he thought he could just walk away from me without consequences, then he was in for a rude awakening. But how? That's when I realized something. Greg had always thought of me as the stay-at-home wife, the one who depended on him, the one who needed him to make things happen. But what if that wasn't true? What if I could stand on my own 2 feet, build something for myself, and show him that I was just as capable as anyone in that high society world they lived in? I wasn't going to compete with Miranda. I didn't care about her money, her looks, or her power. I didn't need any of that to prove my worth. What I needed was to prove to myself that I could survive without Greg. And so, I began to make a plan. I started small. I dusted off my old business books, the ones I had abandoned years ago when I chose to focus on our life together. I started reading again, learning about investments, the stock market, and real estate. It felt like a long shot, but I had to try. I had to prove that I could build something for myself, something that didn't depend on anyone else. At first, I was overwhelmed. It had been years since I had done anything for myself, and the world of business felt like a foreign land. But I was determined. And slowly, the pieces started to fall into place. I started networking, reaching out to people I knew, people who had connections in the business world. I attended meetings, sat in on webinars, and soaked up as much information as I could. Every day, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident. I wasn't just Leela, the abandoned wife. I was Leela, the woman who was going to take control of her life. And that's when the change started. I could feel it deep in my bones. The transformation was happening. It wasn't just about making money, it was about regaining my independence, my confidence, my power. Greg had made a choice, and so had I. I wasn't going to let him define me. I wasn't going to let his betrayal be the thing that kept me from moving forward. I was going to make my own future, one step at a time. And this was just the beginning. The days after Greg left felt like a never-ending loop of numbness. I would wake up, eat, go through the motions of my day, and then return to my empty house just to do it all again. I was tired of feeling lost, tired of feeling like my whole world had been turned upside down. The truth was sinking in deeper with each passing day. Greg was gone, and nothing was going to bring him back. The more I let myself wallow, the more I realized that I needed to change. But change how? For days, I had been sitting in the same chair in the same house, letting the weight of the situation drag me down. I couldn't live like this. I knew I wasn't the type of person who could just sit around feeling sorry for myself forever. I had always been strong, or at least I used to be. Somewhere between being Greg's wife and keeping up with our perfect life, I had forgotten who I was, what I was capable of. But now, it was time to remember. I woke up one morning, the sun already peeking through the blinds, and I felt something different. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a sudden burst of inspiration, but it was enough. It was a flicker of determination. I couldn't just let this be the end of me. I refused to let Greg's betrayal be the story of my life. I got out of bed, pulled on some comfortable clothes, and sat down at my kitchen table. The house was silent, the usual hum of life now replaced with nothingness. I took a deep breath, looking around the room, trying to focus on the next step. What did I want? What could I do? The answer came quickly. I wanted more than what I had been, more than what Greg thought I could be. I had spent so much time making him my world, relying on him for everything, that I had forgotten how strong I was on my own. I had forgotten what it felt like to be me. I reached for my phone and opened my notes app. The idea of writing things down, of creating a plan, felt empowering. I had to start somewhere. Step 1, build my own life. It seemed simple, but it was the hardest thing to do after everything that had happened. I needed to take control of my future, without Greg, without anyone else. I didn't need his money, his connections, or his approval. I had to find my own way. Step 2, find my independence. I didn't know where to begin, but I knew that independence was the key. I needed to stop relying on Greg for everything. It was time to learn new things, to pick up the pieces of my life and rebuild. I wasn't just going to sit around waiting for life to hand me anything. I would go out and get it. I spent the next few hours researching. I researched everything: business ideas, investment strategies, real estate, and ways to become financially independent. My head was spinning with all the possibilities, but something inside me clicked. I was learning, I was absorbing information, and for the first time since the night of the gala, I felt alive. The path ahead was unclear, but I felt a sense of purpose rising within me. I didn't need Greg to succeed. I didn't need anyone. I made a few calls that afternoon, reaching out to old contacts. People I knew from my past, before I became a wife, before I became wrapped up in Greg's world. I started rebuilding the connections I had lost over the years. One of them led to an opportunity to get involved in a small but promising real estate project. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I had no experience, no deep knowledge of the industry, but I was hungry for it. The more I learned, the more I wanted to dive in. The thought of creating something, anything, on my own filled me with a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. The first few days were overwhelming. I was learning at a pace I hadn't thought possible. The more I dove into business books, the more I found myself in awe of the women who had built empires from the ground up. They didn't wait for life to hand them opportunities, they created their own. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I took a long, hard look at my financial situation. Greg had always handled that part of our lives. He was the one who made the big decisions, the one who brought in the money. I had always trusted him to take care of us. But now, I had to take care of myself. It was intimidating at first. The thought of taking control of my finances made me nervous. But every time I hesitated, I thought about the life I wanted. I wanted freedom, not just from Greg, but from the idea that I needed anyone to validate my worth. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had everything I needed inside of me. I signed up for investment classes, and I started taking steps toward making my first solo investment. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to get my feet wet. I wasn't looking to get rich quickly. That was never my goal. I just wanted something real, something I could be proud of. Every day, I chipped away at my old insecurities, pushing myself to take risks and trust my instincts. Days turned into weeks, and I began to see changes. I found myself waking up earlier, feeling motivated to learn, to grow. I spent less time thinking about Greg and more time thinking about me, what I wanted, what I needed. I found a strength in myself that I hadn't realized existed. It was a quiet confidence, a slow-burning fire that kept me going even when doubts crept in. And then, one evening, just as I was sitting down to review some financial reports, I received an unexpected call. It was from an old friend, one I hadn't spoken to in years. "Leela, is that you?" she said, her voice filled with excitement. I smiled, surprised to hear from her. "It's me, how are you?" "I'm good, but I'm calling because I've heard some things. About you, about what you're doing now." I felt a knot in my stomach. "What do you mean?" She laughed lightly. "I heard you've been doing some investments, learning about real estate. That's impressive, Leela. Honestly, I didn't know you had it in you." I felt a blush creep across my cheeks. "I've been trying something new. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I'm trying." "You've always been smart, Leela. You always had that fire in you. I'm glad you're finally showing it." Her words meant more than she could ever know. They were the kind of words I had needed to hear. Encouragement, belief in myself. It was like a light bulb went off. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to show the world who I really was. "I've got a few people I know in the business who might be able to help you," she continued. "You should really come to this networking event next month. It's full of people who could be a game changer for you." I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest. This was it, the opportunity I had been waiting for. My first real chance to break into the business world on my own. "I'll be there," I said, my voice firm. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I sat back in my chair, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. This wasn't just another step, it was a leap. A leap toward something bigger, something better than what I had been living in for the past few months. The night before the event, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities. I was going to meet people, hear from people who had already built their own success. It felt like the first real step I was taking toward my own success. As I stood in front of the mirror the next morning, adjusting my outfit, I felt a surge of confidence. This wasn't just a networking event. It was my chance to change my life, to prove to myself that I wasn't just the woman Greg left behind. I was Leela, and I was going to take the world by storm. That afternoon, I walked into the event with my head held high. The room was filled with successful, powerful people, and I was about to become one of them. I was ready. I remember the first time I walked into that networking event like it was yesterday. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and the low hum of conversations. Everywhere I looked, there were people in sharp suits, women in designer dresses, all of them with a sense of purpose in their eyes. There was an energy in the room that felt electric, like everyone was on the edge of something big. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying investment strategies, learning about real estate, building my confidence. I had done everything I could to make sure I wouldn't look out of place. But still, standing in the middle of that room, I felt small. I wasn't sure if it was because of the wealth around me or the fear that I wasn't really cut out for this. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go back. I had made a promise to myself that I wasn't going to live in the shadow of Greg or anyone else. This was my time to step forward. I took a deep breath and adjusted the strap of my purse. I couldn't let my nerves take over. It took a few minutes to get my bearings, but I finally found my stride. I mingled with a few people, introducing myself with confidence I didn't know I had. I was surprised by how easy it felt to talk to people once I stopped overthinking everything. I listened more than I spoke, absorbing what they were saying, making mental notes of who was who. I wasn't looking for immediate deals. I was looking for connections, for a chance to prove to myself that I could do this. Then I saw him. It was like everything in the room shifted. The crowd parted, and there he was, standing by the bar, laughing with a few other businessmen. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suit expensive. It was Greg. I didn't even have to think twice about it. I knew it was him the moment I saw him. And that was when everything clicked. Greg had never looked at me like this, like I was worth anything more than the woman he could show off to the world. He had never taken me seriously. I had been his wife, his accessory, the one he could show off at galas. But now, here I was, walking into a room full of powerful people on my own. I wasn't just the woman he left behind, I was Leela. The woman who was going to change everything. I turned away from Greg, not wanting to make a scene, but the sight of him still stung. I had to keep moving forward. I had to prove to myself, to everyone, that I was more than just Greg's ex-wife. I spent the next few hours talking to people, absorbing everything I could. There was a woman, Alina, who was in real estate and had started her own company a few years ago. She was exactly the kind of person I wanted to be, successful, driven, and independent. I asked her about her journey, how she had started from nothing and built her empire. Her story resonated with me, and I could tell she saw something in me too. "You're different," she said to me after a long conversation. "You've got the right mindset. If you keep going like this, you'll make it." That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was doing it. As the event came to an end, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't expected. The old me would have left early, disappointed in myself for not fitting in better. But tonight, I had stayed. I had pushed myself, made connections, and learned something new. On the way home, I replayed the night in my mind. I didn't know if any of it would lead to anything, but I did know one thing for sure: I had taken control. I had stepped out of the life I had known and into something completely new, and it felt incredible. Over the next few months, things began to change. I worked harder than I ever had before. I took Alina's advice to heart and started building a foundation for my future. I didn't have much, but I had the determination to make it work. Every day, I woke up early, studied my new business interests, and made more connections. Slowly, I started seeing the fruits of my labor. I began to invest, making small but smart moves in the stock market and real estate. Each success, no matter how small, fueled me to keep going. I started making money, not a lot, but enough to see that I could do this. And the more I succeeded, the more I felt like myself again. It wasn't easy, though. There were plenty of days when I doubted myself. There were times when I thought I wasn't cut out for it, but every time I hit a roadblock, I reminded myself of why I started. I was doing this for me. I was doing this because I had to. I also made time for things that brought me peace. I started running in the mornings to clear my head. I read books that inspired me, not just business books, but also novels that reminded me of who I was before I was defined by my marriage. I took myself out to dinner sometimes, enjoying a glass of wine, just me. It felt strange at first, eating alone, not having someone to share my thoughts with. But eventually, I realized how much I needed this time. I had spent so many years living for Greg, making his needs my own. Now, I was learning to live for myself. Then came another turning point. I had been working on a real estate project for months, and the moment of truth was approaching. I had invested a portion of my savings into it, and it was finally ready to show results. This was my first big opportunity, the one that would tell me if I could really make it on my own. The project was a luxury condo development, and it was one of those rare deals that had the potential to be huge. I had worked with a team of experienced investors, and I was in the final stages of securing funding. The pressure was intense. There were sleepless nights, calls with clients, meetings that felt like they would never end, but the excitement I felt was undeniable. This was my chance to prove everything to myself. One afternoon, after a particularly stressful meeting, I stood in front of a mirror in my office, staring at my reflection. I had been in this position before, standing in front of a mirror, wondering who I was. But now, it was different. I saw a woman who had taken control of her life, who was no longer defined by someone else's choices. I wasn't the heartbroken wife anymore. I was Leela, the woman who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. And then it happened. The deal closed. The project was a success. My investment paid off, and I felt a rush of pride like I had never felt before. It was more than just the money. It was the feeling of accomplishment, the knowledge that I had done this on my own. I remember sitting in my office, looking out the window at the city below, and for the first time in months, I felt truly free. This was my life now. I had created it. I had made it happen. A few days later, Alina called to congratulate me. "You did it," she said, her voice full of excitement. "I knew you had it in you." Her words meant the world to me. She was right, I had done it. But as I reflected on everything I had accomplished, I realized there was still something missing. Despite all the success, despite everything I had achieved, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for something. Waiting for Greg to come back and apologize, waiting for someone to tell me that I had done enough. And that's when it hit me. I didn't need Greg to apologize. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had done this for me, and I had already proven everything I needed to prove. The transformation was complete. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And as I looked forward to the future, I knew that no matter what came my way, I could handle it. I had finally become the woman I had always been capable of being. I wasn't sure when the change happened. Maybe it was the first time I made a successful investment, or the first deal I closed on my own. Maybe it was the day I realized I could stand tall in a room full of powerful people without hiding behind Greg's name. But whatever it was, I knew one thing. I wasn't the same woman who had been left behind at that gala. Time had passed, months, maybe even a year since that night. Greg had moved on, I knew that. I heard whispers about him and Miranda. They were the power couple now, the ones everyone envied. They were still attending the same parties, showing off their wealth, their influence, their perfect lives, but none of it bothered me anymore. At least, not in the way it used to. I had something they didn't. I had power of my own. I had the life I had built for myself on my own terms. But even though I had grown stronger, even though I had proven to myself that I could thrive without Greg, there was still a part of me that wanted more. Not more in the sense of money or status, but more in the sense of justice. I had been humiliated, I had been discarded, and I wasn't going to let that go. I hadn't thought about it for a long time, about revenge. But it came to me one morning, as I sat in my office, scrolling through some old contacts, reading through the news. I came across a headline that made my heart race. Greg and Miranda had just finalized a deal for a new luxury development in Greenwich, a project that would put them on the map for good, securing their place at the top of the financial food chain. Something stirred in me when I saw that. It wasn't just jealousy or anger. It was the sudden, undeniable realization that this was the moment. This was my opportunity to make my mark. I wasn't going to let them keep winning, keep flaunting their success in front of me while I built my own. No, this time, I was going to take action. I was going to show them that I was more than just the woman they left behind. I was going to make sure they knew exactly who they had underestimated. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. "Leela," he said, his voice smooth and professional, "I'm glad you called. What can I help you with today?" "I need you to do some digging," I replied. "I need to know everything about this development Greg and Miranda are involved in. I want the financials, the connections, the permits. They're hiding something, I'm sure of it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "This sounds serious. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I could hear the caution in his voice, but it didn't matter. I had already made up my mind. "I'm sure," I said. "I want to know everything. I want to find a way to bring them down." He didn't ask any more questions after that. I knew he understood. It was time for me to play the game on my own terms. Over the next few weeks, I dove deep into the project. I spent hours poring over legal documents, permits, zoning laws. I looked into every piece of the development they were involved in, every financial backer, every connection they had made. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered irregularities, questionable transactions, and even signs of mismanagement. It wasn't enough to destroy them outright, but it was enough to cause problems. I wasn't interested in tearing them down for petty reasons. No, I wanted them to feel the way I had felt when Greg walked away from me, when he chose her over me. I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions, to understand that they weren't invincible. The next part of the plan was riskier. I reached out to a few key players in the real estate industry, investors who had been burned by Greg and Miranda in the past. They weren't big names, but they had enough influence to cause a stir. I met with them privately, shared the information I had gathered, and made it clear that if they wanted to take advantage of the situation, they could. I didn't want to be the one to strike the first blow, but I knew I could plant the seed. I wasn't going to let my hands get dirty. But I knew someone else would, and it would be all the more satisfying that way. Then I waited. Days turned into weeks, and I watched as the project continued to grow. Greg and Miranda were still in the spotlight, their faces plastered on every business magazine, their deals seemingly going off without a hitch. But something was bubbling under the surface. Something was about to break. And then it did. One morning, I opened my laptop to find the headline I had been waiting for. Luxury development in Greenwich under investigation for financial irregularities. The story hit the papers like a bombshell. It was everywhere, the whispers, the rumors, the scandal. It didn't take long for people to start pointing fingers, asking questions about how the project had been handled. Investigators were getting involved, clients were pulling out, and suddenly, the shiny image Greg and Miranda had worked so hard to build was crumbling before their eyes. I sat back in my chair, a sense of satisfaction rushing through me. I hadn't done this for revenge in the typical sense. I didn't need to destroy their lives, but I needed them to know that they weren't untouchable. I needed them to feel the weight of their actions, and now they did. It didn't take long for Greg to call me. "Leela," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "what the hell is going on? You know I've been working on this deal for months. This investigation is going to ruin everything. I need you to fix this." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. The irony of it hit me hard. He thought I was still the same woman he could manipulate, the one who would bend over backward for him. But not anymore. "I'm not fixing anything, Greg," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. "You're on your own with this one." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, trying to figure out what to say next. "You don't understand," he said, his voice growing more desperate. "Miranda and I, this was our big break. If we lose this, everything we've worked for is over." "Sounds like you should have thought about that before you decided to leave me for her," I replied. My words were quiet, but they landed with the weight of everything I had been holding inside. There was silence again. And then, Greg spoke, but his voice was different. There was no more arrogance, no more confidence. It was just a man trying to keep his empire from falling apart. "I didn't want this for us, Leela. I didn't want to hurt you, but you never understood me. Miranda and I, we just have more in common." I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't that I wanted Greg to suffer. It wasn't that at all. But hearing him admit, even in his own broken way, that I had been right, that he had been wrong, was all I needed. It was the closure I had been waiting for. "Goodbye, Greg," I said, hanging up the phone without another word. That was it, I had won, not in a petty way, but in a way that truly mattered. I didn't need to make him beg or grovel. I didn't need to tear him apart. The simple fact that I had proven my worth, that I had built something of my own, was enough. And as I sat back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline, I realized something. I hadn't just taken back control of my life. I had taken back my power. No one could ever take that from me again. Not Greg, not Miranda, not anyone. The world was mine to conquer, and I was just getting started. I remember the moment I saw the headline, "Luxury Development in Greenwich Under Investigation for Financial Irregularities." It was almost surreal, seeing it in print, knowing that I was the one who had set this whole thing in motion. But as the days passed and the story began to unfold, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. It wasn't like I had orchestrated a grand conspiracy. It wasn't even about tearing Greg and Miranda down, at least not in the way most people would think. It was about showing them, showing everyone, that I wasn't just some woman who had been left behind. I wasn't someone to be dismissed, to be forgotten. I had built my life, my career, from the ground up, and I was going to make sure they knew it. At first, it seemed like nothing was going to come of it. Greg and Miranda, as smug as ever, brushed it off. They were still holding the line, claiming they were victims of a smear campaign. I could almost hear their voices in my head, imagining them huddled together, plotting how to spin the narrative. But as the investigation continued, I saw the cracks start to show. Their world, the one they had built on secrets and manipulation, was slowly beginning to crumble. One evening, as I was sitting at my desk, reviewing some investment opportunities, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me I should pick up. "Leela," a voice said when I answered. It was Alina, the woman who had taken me under her wing months ago. She had been my guide, my mentor, and now she was calling to offer me a chance to take things even further. "I don't know if you've been following the news, but things are about to get very interesting for Greg and Miranda," Alina continued. "I've been hearing whispers. Their investors are pulling out, the deal is shaky, and there are rumors of more problems behind the scenes. You've done some damage, but there's an opportunity here for you to get involved. A real one." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "There's a buyer, a very serious buyer, who's looking to purchase that project from under their noses. They'll need someone to take charge, someone with the vision to make it happen. And I think that someone is you." I let her words sink in. For months, I had been working hard, building my own business, making my investments grow. But this was different. This was bigger than anything I had done before. I had spent enough time playing by the rules, making calculated moves. But now, I was in a position to take control of something that could change everything. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady, a sense of certainty filling me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't just a woman scorned, I was someone who had earned the right to be at the table, to make the decisions. "Good," Elena replied. "I'll set up the meeting, you'll need to be sharp. They won't hand this to you easily." I hung up the phone, a rush of adrenaline coursing through me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I wasn't just going to watch from the sidelines anymore. I was going to step in and take what was rightfully mine. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I spent hours with my financial advisor, studying the numbers, making sure I had all the facts straight. I dug deeper into the project's background, looking for any gaps, any mistakes that could be leveraged. The more I learned, the more I realized how vulnerable Greg and Miranda were. They had taken shortcuts, made risky decisions, and now those decisions were about to come back to haunt them. The day of the meeting, I walked into the high-rise building with my head held high. The room I entered was sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a perfect view of the city. I had been in rooms like this before, but this time, I wasn't here as a guest. I wasn't here to smile politely and play the part of the supportive wife. I was here to take charge. The man sitting across from me was a powerful investor, someone who could make or break the future of the project. I had never met him before, but Alina had prepared me well. We exchanged pleasantries, but I could tell right away that he was sizing me up, trying to figure out if I was worth his time. "I've heard a lot about you, Leela," he said, his voice smooth but calculating. "People say you've been making quite a name for yourself in the business world." I smiled, not letting the flattery get to me. "I've been focused on building my own portfolio, but this is an opportunity I couldn't pass up." He raised an eyebrow. "You've done your research, I see." I nodded. "I know the project inside and out. I've looked into the financials, the permits, the players involved. There are irregularities, mismanagement. But I believe with the right approach, it can be saved." He leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "And what makes you think you're the right person to fix it?" I took a deep breath. "Because I'm not afraid to take risks. I'm not here to play it safe. I have a vision for this project, one that will not only salvage it but make it a success. And unlike some of the people who have been involved in this project from the start, I'm not in it for the short-term gain. I'm in it for the long run." There was a long pause as he considered my words. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing the decision. But finally, he nodded. "I like your confidence," he said. "All right, Leela, let's see what you can do." The deal was mine. Walking out of that building, I felt like I was floating. This wasn't just a victory. This was my moment. The project that Greg and Miranda had spent so much time building, the one they thought would secure their place in the industry, was now in my hands. It was no longer theirs, and just like that, I had turned the tables on them. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I worked tirelessly, meeting with contractors, investors, and legal teams, getting everything in place. It wasn't easy. There were obstacles, setbacks, and moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. But I pushed through. I was stronger now. I had proven to myself that I could take on anything, and I wasn't about to let this slip through my fingers. And all the while, Greg and Miranda were watching from the sidelines. They could see the project slipping away from them, but there was nothing they could do about it. The more they tried to regain control, the more they realized that they had underestimated me. I knew Greg was furious. I could see it in the messages he sent me, the way he tried to manipulate people around me. But it was too late. I had already won. One evening, about a month into the project, I was sitting in my office, reviewing the latest reports when my phone rang. It was Greg. "Leela," he said, his voice tight. "What the hell are you doing? You can't just take that from us. You don't know what you're doing." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "Greg, you had your chance. You made your decisions, and now it's my turn." "I didn't want this for us," he continued, his tone shifting. "But you're making a huge mistake. We were good together. I was good to you." I let out a laugh. "You were good to me, really. You left me for her, Greg. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he might say something else, but he didn't. Instead, he hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, my heart pounding. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about making Greg suffer. It was about me, about reclaiming my life, my power. And in that moment, I knew I had done exactly that. The project moved forward without a hitch. The development became a success, not just financially, but in every other way too. I had proven to myself that I was capable, that I didn't need anyone's approval or validation. As the final touches were put on the project, I stood in front of the building, looking up at it with a sense of pride. This was mine. This was my success, and no one could ever take that away from me. I had become the woman I always knew I could be. It had been months since I'd stepped into the world of business on my own terms, and standing there, looking at the finished project, I realized something profound. I had transformed. The woman who had once been abandoned, broken-hearted, and unsure of herself was no longer the same person. I was different now, not just in the way I looked or the way I carried myself, but in the way I felt about myself. I had done the work. I had built something real, something that wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. It was mine. As I stood there, gazing up at the luxury development I had taken from Greg and Miranda, I couldn't help but smile. The view was breathtaking, the city sprawling out in front of me with its shining lights, and the building stood as a testament to my strength. My success was no longer about getting back at them or proving something to anyone. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever believed. And it felt damn good. I hadn't expected to be this emotional about it. Maybe it was the late-night work, the endless calls and meetings, or the constant pushing against the tide. But now, in this moment, standing on the roof of a building I had fought for, it was all worth it. The pain I had felt when Greg left me, the confusion, the heartbreak, it all made sense now. Those were the things that had driven me to make a change. They had lit a fire in me that I couldn't ignore. I'd been left behind, but I hadn't stayed behind. The first thing I did after the project officially closed was call Alina. She had been my mentor throughout this journey, guiding me when I didn't know where to turn, pushing me when I doubted myself. It had been her belief in me that had got me through the tough times, and now, as I stood at the top of my own success, I wanted to thank her. "Leela, how's everything going?" Alina's voice was warm, filled with genuine excitement. "It's done," I said, my voice steady. "The project is officially mine. We finished it, and it's a success. I can't believe it." There was a pause, and then Alina laughed, a sound full of pride. "I knew you could do it. You've earned this, Leela. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you for everything," I said. "None of this would have happened without you." "Oh, please, you did the hard work. You took the risks. I'm just happy I got to be part of it." We spoke for a while longer, catching up and talking about the future. Alina had always been there, but now it felt like I was on my own, stepping forward into a world that I had only ever dreamed of. But it wasn't just Alina I wanted to speak to. I had one more call to make. I knew it was coming, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it. It had been weeks since I had spoken to Greg. I didn't want to talk to him, didn't need him to validate my success, but I knew he would call at some point. And as much as I hated to admit it, I had been waiting for it. The phone rang twice before I picked it up. "Leela," Greg's voice came through, sounding hesitant, unsure. "I heard about the project. Congratulations. It looks like you've really done something here." I didn't know what to say at first. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "Thanks, Greg," I said calmly. "It's been a lot of hard work, but it's finally come together." There was an awkward pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him trying to choose his words carefully. "Listen," he started, his voice softer now. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about us, about everything. And I don't know if I ever really apologized for how I left you. It was a mess. I was wrong." I felt a strange, almost bitter satisfaction course through me. He was apologizing, finally, but it didn't feel like the victory I thought it would. It didn't make me feel better. It just made me realize how much time I had wasted on him. "Greg, you don't have to apologize," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You made your choice, and I made mine." "Yeah," he said, and I could hear the regret in his tone. "I guess you did, and you've done a hell of a job proving me wrong." I let his words hang in the air for a moment. He was right. I had proven him wrong, and I didn't need him to tell me that. I had done it on my own. "I'm glad you're doing well, Greg," I said finally. "But I've moved on. I'm not the same person I was when you left." He sighed deeply, and for a moment, it felt like we were both letting go of the past. "I know," he said quietly. "I can see that now. I just hope you know that I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," I repeated, but it didn't hurt anymore. "Goodbye, Greg." I hung up the phone without another word. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. It wasn't the kind of freedom that came from revenge or from trying to get back at him. It was the kind of freedom that came from realizing that I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth. I was enough, and I had built this life for myself. And just like that, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't tied to the past anymore. I wasn't defined by Greg's choices or Miranda's wealth or the mistakes I had made along the way. I was defined by what I had done, by the steps I had taken to change my life. I spent the next few months expanding my business, making even more investments, and building a network of people who respected me for what I had accomplished. The woman who had once been left behind was now at the top of her game, and I knew this was just the beginning. One night, as I stood in front of the balcony of my new apartment, one I had paid for with my own success, not Greg's, I looked out at the city lights, reflecting on everything I had achieved. The air was cool, the streets below bustling with life, and I felt at peace. I had come so far, and no matter what came next, I knew I could handle it. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "This is my life now, and it's mine to live however I choose." No one could ever take that from me. Not Greg, not Miranda, and not anyone else. I had built this life piece by piece with my own hands, and I was ready for whatever came next. Because now, I knew that nothing could stand in my way.